Is atheism a fraud? This is a common thing that's said by some people out there. And you can find videos here on YouTube where you have several Christians that are trying to argue that atheism is fraudulent in some way, that it's a false worldview or something like that, which atheism isn't a worldview, but these people, they don't want to understand that. So one of the things that I try to do here on the channel is actually respond to those that are throwing this ridiculous idea out there that, quote, atheism is a fraud, or that it's a fraudulent way in order to view our reality. This whole notion that it's ridiculous to think that a God doesn't exist and he totally cares whether or not you touch yourself at night. That's the kind of thing that I want to push back on. And today we have somebody who is going to single-handedly prove that atheism is a fraud. So if you want to fuck around and find out how atheism is definitely not fraudulent, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're taking a look at a video where, like I said, this guy is supposedly going to single-handedly prove that atheism is indeed fraudulent. We are only going to be talking about whether or not a God exists. We're not going to be talking about any other concepts other than this idea that God doesn't exist. Specifically, this guy's definition of God, which would be the Christian version of God. I will be taking a hard atheist stance in this video, in that I'm saying that the Christian God definitely doesn't exist. As far as the overarching question of whether or not a God exists, whether we know any kind of description of that God or not, I remain agnostic. So I take it that this video is supposed to prove that the Christian God specifically definitely exists, and that atheists and atheism is just completely wrong because there's definite proof that God exists, and I can't wait for this evidence.
Most atheists hold to some form of biological evolution. Many Big Bang models would assert that the universe is billions of years old and that all came together from one singularity, after which it started evolving over time.
Okay, this has fuck all to do with atheism. This literally has no bearing on whether or not a God exists. Like evolution, you can be atheist and believe that evolution happened, or well, rather accept the fact that evolution happens, like it's still happening, but it's also happened in the past, and it's the best explanation for how we got the diversity of life on Earth. Also, the Big Bang Theory, you could totally be a Christian and believe in the Big Bang, or the inflation of the universe, rather. None of these things have anything to do with atheism, because you can be a theist and also hold to these positions.
I will be logically proving why this cannot be the case. And I will also be providing reasons why that even though there's enough evidence that God exists, people still reject him anyway. Firstly, claiming that the universe came from a singularity is illogical, since a singularity can create nothing at all.
I'm going to need to stop you right here because you need to provide evidence for this kind of claim. You can't just say, oh, a singularity can't produce anything. It can't do anything. Like, it can't do any work. It can't, inflate an entire universe. You would actually need evidence in order to assert this. In fact, we do have evidence from quantum theory that shows that a space totally devoid of everything that we can pull out of it still has an electrical charge. And considering that there's still an electrical charge there, that means that there's still work to be done even in a space that's devoid of everything. Theoretically, a universe can inflate out of seemingly nothing, and this singularity, as he's calling it, would have the ability in order to inflate into an entire universe. So his whole idea here is contradicted by the scientific information that we currently have. So if he has new information that says that a singularity can't produce an entire universe, like can't inflate into an entire universe, then he needs to present his scientific study, his scientific data, and all that. And he needs to present it, go through the proper channels of peer review and all this other stuff in order for his information to be widely accepted by the greater scientific community. He's made a YouTube channel, and on this YouTube channel, he's put this silly ass video up where he's just baselessly claiming it instead of actually providing evidence.
Since it is a singularity and is not intelligent, this singularity would also have to be infinite if it was what was in the beginning, which is much less logical than saying God is infinite.
How is saying that energy, which is what the singularity would be comprised of, is infinite or eternal, or however you want to describe that, versus a magical wizard that exists outside of time and space that we can't see or really experience? We just have to interpret from shit that naturally happens around us, and we have to attribute that to this magical wizard that exists outside of time and space. Like, I feel like one is far less logical than the other, and it's definitely not the singularity. It's most definitely the wizard that exists outside of time and space.
If you claim that this singularity is intelligent, then you would not be an atheist, because this singularity would be your higher power.
Well, he also has this presumption that whatever inflated our universe, or however our universe came to existence, it needed to be because of a sentient being, some kind of being that could make the decision to do that. Typically, I really don't like this kind of argument from the theists, primarily because we don't need anybody to make the decision for it to rain. Hell, if I can fucking make it snow in North Alabama every single winter, I fucking would, because I miss the snow. I wish there was snow in North Alabama, but you know what? There's fucking not. It's always just either really dry when it's really cold, or it's really hot when it rains. Neither are comfortable, and I'd much rather have snow. But there's no sentient decision making that happens when precipitation occurs. It occurs naturally through natural processes, and there are natural explanations for it. Therefore, if things of that nature, like weather, the rock cycle, the water cycle in general, the cycles of the planetary bodies and all that, if all of that has natural explanations, and the start of the universe most likely has a natural explanation too. Turns out we have a lot of great hypotheses behind that. We don't have any kind of definite answers, but we do have a lot of great ideas as to the nature of the inflation of this universe, to include this universe not being either the only universe that exists or the first instance of this universe. We just simply don't know. And that's what science is about. Getting the information, coming to a conclusion, or creating a hypothesis. And until we can either disprove the hypothesis or collect enough information to really solidify that hypothesis as a scientific theory, then it remains a hypothesis. We just simply don't know the actual answer. And that's perfectly fine. But the presumption that there needs to be some kind of sentience in order to make the decision for the universe to come into existence is begging the question, and it's very fallacious to do.
But if you claim that it is not, then you would be saying that something that created everything was unintelligent. Now, with all that put together, this is why if you claim a singularity created the universe and you still want to be an atheist, then you would have to claim that everything came from nothing, since this singularity, if it were infinite and intelligent, would be a God.
Well, no, see, here's the presumption, is that he has to have whatever caused this universe to inflate. It has to be intelligent to him. It's got to be a sentient being or a sentient presence that made the conscious decision to inflate the universe. And that's just not how shit works in nature. In nature, shit just happens, because that's how nature operates. That's how reality operates. Shit just happens. We are part of that shit just happening. And I mean, some people might see that as like a horrible aspect to a universe without God. But I don't see it that way. I see it as inconsequential. Like, it has no bearing on my existence now as to whether or not some magical fuck wizard outside of time and space decided to create me, or if nature just natured itself into my existence here. I feel like that's a more honest answer, nature just doing its thing and naturing, versus psychopathic magician outside of time and space making a conscious decision. At least nature doesn't have any kind of sentience behind it. So the bad shit that happens, that's just nature being fucking nature. There's no ill will behind it. Whereas for the sentient being, there's definitely ill will behind his actions on occasions as perceived by Christians. So what's better? Like, nature that doesn't have like any kind of sentience or thought behind whatever happens because it's not a thinking entity, it's just the natural world, versus a thinking psychopath that decides to use his magical abilities to make some people in this reality suffer. Like, which one's better, the asshole or just nature being nature? I mean, you pick, I guess. I feel like the nature one is probably the one that's actually correct, though.
The problem with the universe being created by nothing, however, is that if the universe came from nothing, why do we have such order?
Well, such order. What do you mean by such order? I feel like any kind of universe that would pop up, regardless of whether or not God exists, would have order in it in some kind of fashion. And we definitely know that any universe that would pop up would be based in mathematics. Like mathematics would be able to describe that universe because of the different properties of a universe, just like space and time existing in general. To say that, oh, there's order, how could order come out of something that's not sentient? I have to ask, why does there have to be something sentient in the first place? The order of the universe is just one particular property of the universe, and that order, that property of the universe, is just part of nature. It's a fundamental axiom that there is order in this world, or in this universe rather. And so I feel like you're just going a little bit too far with proposing a magical magician that exists outside of time and space that gives it that order. You don't need that. You just need to say nature's gonna fucking nature. That's all you need to say.
Asserting that nothing could create everything that we see around us also goes against the law of conservation of mass, which claims that matter is not created or destroyed.
Actually, the law of conservation of mass was superseded by this law of conservation of energy. Since matter and mass can be represented as energy as well due to Einstein's equation, the law of conservation of energy is more accurate in that it encapsulates all forms of energy, even matter. With this in mind, the inflation of the universe is very easy to explain, and it does not violate this law of conservation of energy, because the potential energy that is encapsulated into a quantum scalar field in a false vacuum state is just transformed from the version of the energy or the form of the energy, the potential energy that it exists in, and then when it fluctuates from the false vacuum state into the true vacuum state, it inflates, right? It releases all that energy. That energy transforms into inflaton particles, which fills the universe, and then those inflaton particles eventually cool down to the point where matter can form. And that is just a transfer of energy. Like, that's just energy transforming into different types of energy. Energy is still being conserved. The energy doesn't go away. It just transforms into a different version of it. And so the law of conservation of energy is not violated by this. But also, I would like to note that the normal laws of physics and all of that seem to break down the closer we get to, the inflation event. Also, the closer you get to the event horizon of a black hole, too. Normal physics and nature, like the laws and everything, seem to break down at those two spots. So it seems to me that in those particular cases, we don't have to only think of energy in this one kind of way. We actually don't know what the relationship of energy is with reality in those particular instances. And I don't think that we'll ever know. But my point is that this guy's wrong. There's no violation of the law of conservation of energy or matter, mass, by the way. So he's just flat out wrong about this. And it just shows that he didn't do any kind of research prior to putting this bullshit opinion out.
Evolution is so often deemed scientific, but it actually goes against the own scientific principles that have been gathered by people throughout time.
This is also wrong. Evolution doesn't violate anything. This also has nothing to do with atheism. So I'm not exactly sure why he's bringing it up, other than he attributes evolution to atheism because he thinks that evolution is somehow an argument against God, when it's really not. So evolution doesn't have any kind of space in this particular discussion of whether or not God exists.
Another common objection is people say, well, doesn't God have to have a creator? And he doesn't, because this is why.
Well, so this whole who created God thing I've covered here on the channel if you want to go and check it out. But as far as this goes, this is normally a response to somebody saying, well, everything in the universe has a cause. And if God supposedly exists both inside the universe and outside of the universe, then doesn't that mean that God needs a cause? Basically, it ends up in a special pleading argument on the Christian side because they think that, oh, well, my God's special and doesn't need to be created. He's eternal. Of course, on the scientific side, we're like, oh, well, energy has been shown to neither be able to be created nor destroyed. It just changes form. That's what we have evidence for. And so they're like, my magician over here is special and doesn't need to be created. He actually created your energy. That's how powerful he is. But they don't have any evidence for this. They just blindly assert it because an old fucking book told them as much. Or, well, rather, they interpret it from the book that doesn't directly say any of this because, of course, people that wrote those books didn't know about the law of conservation of energy or how nature really operated. They still thought that there was a fucking dome over the earth and that there were multiple levels to heaven and that there were demons and shit that lived on top of the firmament. Excuse fucking me if I don't take those type of people's scientific prowess seriously.
Time, space, and matter were all created, and there has to be something beyond time, space, and matter to create all things in the first place.
Well, first of all, there's the begging the question part, like to create things in the first place, sort of assigning some kind of sentience to it because he can only imagine something sentient deciding to create the universe. Second of all, I believe energy being like what he would call eternal or just not being able to be created or destroyed would satisfy this, and energy transforming from this potential energy state into what would eventually become matter is perfectly reasonable, and any universe that would inflate would have order in it so that can be described by mathematics because of the nature of space and time. So yeah, he's fucking wrong.
Now, a Christian would say that the original first beginning, the start of everything, and the beginning and the end would be God. But an atheist would have to default to nothing being the beginning and the end.
I actually, no, we don't. There's several hypotheses, not just the quantum tunneling sort of explanation for the beginning of the universe. That's just the best one that I found out there, the one that I'm most convinced by. But there are several hypotheses about how this universe could have inflated to begin with. And none of them require any kind of sentience or and none of them require any kind of special pleading. Whereas this guy right here only has special pleading for his psychopathic magician.
In fact, there is enough evidence to prove that God has to exist and evolution cannot be true. But the reason is this for why people do not believe in him. John 3:20 says, "For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed."
This would make sense if it matched reality in any kind of discernible way. The fact that there are plenty of Christians out there that do horrible things and still pray to God, shining a light on their horrible actions. There are plenty of Christians out there that on a regular basis molest and rape little kids, and they still pray to God. They ask for forgiveness and everything like that. Here's what I don't get from the Christian side of this on this particular thing is that they commonly think that, oh, well, atheists just don't want to be held accountable for their actions, when it doesn't seem to me really to be all that big of a hit for you to be a Christian and then just ask for forgiveness. Like there's already this thing worked into Christianity where if you do bad shit, it's not all that bad because you could just ask for forgiveness and God will forgive you, right? There's no motive to leave the faith in order to continue doing bad things when you have a solution for doing the bad things in your faith already. It's not that I want to continue doing bad things or I don't want to shine light on my wicked actions, because anything that you would consider wicked of me now, I was just as freely able to do as a Christian. I just had an easier time reconciling committing those wicked actions. I'm not saying that I committed any kind of wicked actions. I'm just saying that within the paradigm of Christianity, you have an easy way to absolve yourself over these wicked actions. Whereas now, like, I don't have that particular thing. Like, if anything, this is motive for me to be a Christian. It's not motive for me not to be a Christian.
People are naturally inclined to make up their own image of God in their minds, or deny him completely because of the bad things that they do. The reason why we hate God is the same reason why a burglar might hate a police officer. They've done something wrong and they don't want to get caught.
This is just so hilarious. First of all, I feel like this analogy is a false analogy. And also I've heard it from Frank Turek. So obviously this is just a Frank Turek claim. I don't know why I expect any Christian to have any kind of actual ideas that they have formulated themselves. They all just listen to either Frank Turek, Lee Strobel, J. Warner Wallace, or William Lane Craig, and they just parrot their particular arguments without actually thinking about their own arguments, is what I've noticed from most Christians. Not all Christians, but most Christians. But this whole analogy here is a bit false, because you really have to reimagine this as, all right, let's say that there's an atheist that's doing crimes and a police officer comes up. The police officer is going to hold that atheist, accountable for his crimes, try him in court and all this other stuff. But on a Christian worldview, let's say that this operated like a Christian worldview would. So basically you do the crime, right? And you burgling the house, and then the police officer comes and catches you. And then in order to be absolved of that, you just have to say, oh, I'm really sorry. I promise I won't do it again. Like, I was weak and I got tempted by Satan. Satan and his demons, they wore me like a puppet. They stuck their hand up their ass and was like, go and do a crime. And I'm just really sorry. I won't let it happen again. And then the police officer just lets you go. And it's like, oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, we got to come out here and do this thing just to make sure that you repent and say that you won't do it again. So bye, see you later. In an atheist worldview, not only would the atheist get in trouble, but the Christian gets in trouble too. The Christian and the atheist are both held accountable for their wicked actions. Whereas on Christianity, they're not. This is motive to be a Christian. This is not motive to be an atheist. It's not that atheists are scared of having our wicked actions like exposed to the light or anything like that. If we were a Christian and our wicked deeds got exposed, we could just turn that shit off like a light switch. So essentially, I don't see how there's any kind of motive in being an atheist as far as his particular position goes. All of the motive seems to be on becoming a Christian.
Even though it's completely logical for God to exist, people do not want the moral accountability that comes with believing in him.
I disagree. There's no moral accountability in God's judgment, because God isn't judging you for your moral actions. If you're a Catholic, then that wouldn't exactly be true. Catholics do believe that you can be Catholic and still get sent to hell. You can believe in Jesus and still be sent to hell. There are possibly some Protestant denominations that also feel that way too, but for the most part, the evangelicals out there, most of the ones that are making videos like this, they don't actually believe in being held accountable morally for your actions, because supposedly when you die and you get to heaven, God just asks you whether or not you believe in Jesus, right? God makes a determination about whether or not you believe in Jesus, and then you get into heaven. Now that is the little bit there that a lot of evangelicals like to play around with, because what they end up saying is that, well, God knows it if it's truly in your heart you believe in Jesus. And then you have Protestants like Ray Comfort who say, well, if you are a true Christian, then you will not do any more wicked things. Like, you just don't want to. If you accept Christ into your heart, then you don't want to do any more bad things. But the problem there is that it creates a straw man fallacy, being that you are now determining who's a true Christian and who is not. Second of all, it's not always a one-to-one comparison as to what we consider to be moral and immoral and what Christians claim is a sin and not a sin. Sin in Christianity is just offending God's opinion, right? God has opinions about how you should live your life. If you don't do those things, then you're committing sin. That's not always a one-to-one match with what we consider moral and immoral. And what we consider to be moral and immoral has changed significantly throughout time and culture. Due to that means that God's absolute opinion about what is and isn't sin has changed over time. It used to be a sin to not be Catholic and to be Protestant. It used to be a sin to fillet your significant other, and some people still consider it a sin now. I feel like what Christians think is sin and not sin, they regularly conflate with moral and immoral. Because those two are not a one-to-one match and that there's only a slight bit of overlap between the two, I feel like saying that atheists don't want their immoral actions to be highlighted and for them to be held accountable for that. I feel like that's really kind of missing the point on the differences between the two worldviews. Because if I don't believe in your God, then I don't believe in your sin, right? And if I don't believe in either of those things, that means that whatever actions that I do are not sin. So I don't have sin to worry about. Don't hold other people that aren't part of your religion accountable to your concept of sin. I do feel like morality that's not based in a religion is far superior than religious quote unquote morality, because religious morality is literally just doing what the magical wizard tells you to do, and that's it. And really, in reality, it's somebody claiming to speak for this magical wizard that is telling you what they want you to do. And because there is no magical wizard, it's just some fuck telling you what they want you to do.
This might seem far-fetched, especially to my atheists out there, but let me prove that the reason is because people hate God. We can also intuitively know that God is serious about sin by the fact that people die. Here's why. The Bible says in Romans 1:20, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse."
I hate this particular verse because it says the invisible attributes are clearly seen, and that's not how invisibility fucking works. And like, I get that we can perceive things that seem to be invisible to us. He's literally saying that these things are invisible to us, these invisible attributes that we can clearly see with our eyes. This is a contradictory notion. This is what Christianity does to you. It gets you to accept contradictory things, and it gets you to forego your critical thinking skills and being like, hey, how can we clearly see these things with our naked eyes if they're fucking invisible? I'm not going to sit here and say gamma rays are clearly seen. Like, we're not going to say that. Gamma rays and X-rays are not clearly seen. We have to use extra scientific equipment in order to perceive those things.
It also says in Romans 6:23 that the wages of sin is death. Very quickly, I would also like to address a common argument that people say against Christians that use the Bible to prove the Bible. I am proving the Bible with the Bible as much as you could prove that the president lives in the White House by looking inside the White House. You can see that the Bible's true about what it says about itself because it actually says things that we can look at outside the world and see if the world attests to the Bible.
Yeah, and the world does not attest to the Bible. I mean, you could just do a basic historical summary of the things that the Bible says and then compare that to actual history. Like, for instance, the Israelites, they're really just Canaanites. They were an offshoot from Canaanite people. And then, the Israelites started up their shit, and then they were really pissed off at the other Canaanites. And so they decided to kill them. And like, they created their own religion, which they took one particular god from the pantheon of gods from the culture that they came from. And they made that god the one true God, or the one God that at least they worshiped. And then Christians made him the one true God, and then demoted every other divine being to just being like an angel or something like that, or some other kind of lower like divine being. And so, I mean, there's several things in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that just simply don't match reality. And so, yeah, sure, look at the Bible and see if it matches to reality. You won't find anything there. I mean, the very beginning of the Bible has God speaking a magical incantation to create everything. And then plants existed before the sun did. I guess that's because God shone light out of his asshole in order to feed the plants. Or maybe the physics and the biology of how plants operate just work fundamentally differently, and that's a magical explanation that changes as soon as the sin's committed or something. Like, as soon as Eve bit into that apple, plants all of a sudden needed to start having light or some shit like that. I don't know. They come up with magical explanations all the fucking time for this shit. But yeah, sure, use the Bible, check it against reality. You'll find that the Bible does not match up to reality. I mean, that's just plainly seen, and literally plainly seen. This is something that you can clearly see by reading the fucking words in the book. Oh, hey, you know what? I just thought of another example. In Numbers, the numbers that are reported by the authors are not accurate and do not match population growth mathematics. Like, the mathematics of how the Israelites exploded in number in the book of Numbers just doesn't mathematically hold up whatsoever. So that is all fucking bupkis too.
Many atheists actually use the existence of death as a reason why God cannot be good or righteous.
No, the existence of death I would not use as like an example of how God's not good or righteous. I would say God's not good or righteous because of the suffering that happens, but the suffering occurs before death occurs. I don't think that everybody has to be eternal in order for God to be a good person. I would think that alleviating as much suffering as possible. And even then, on the Christian worldview, death is only the beginning of the eternal afterlife, right? On a Christian worldview, if God were benevolent, death could still be a thing because that's just a transition to a different form. Like that's just transitioning like a state of energy from one form to another on the Christian worldview. So, I mean, that wouldn't be a good argument against the Christian God, but needless suffering happening in reality now, that's definitely an argument against his benevolence and an argument against the Christian God in general.
However, they use this argument because they do not understand that they are guilty against God and how serious God takes sin. The other religions of the world, other than Christianity, do not have answers for death that are coherent, that are logical, that make sense.
I mean, Christianity doesn't have any kind of solution for that either. Also, I feel like he's about to go into a rant that says, oh, well, only my religion caters to the bullshit that my religion created in the first place. All of these bullshit like topics that exist in my religion, no other religion handles these fabricated topics like my religion does. You know, the religion that fabricated them in the first place. So obviously mine's better if we're operating under the understanding that my religion is the one that sets this reality up. You know, so I mean, everybody else is fucked. My religion's awesome. Woo!
Because why would God allow bad things to happen to good people? But the better question is, why does God allow good things to happen to bad people? Because we've sinned against him. And the answer is, he has amazing grace and mercy and steadfast love that we don't see because we think we deserve no harm done to us because we think we're good.
No, I mean, I don't think anybody has a presumption that humans are good in general. And also, like, I don't see how this is a solution for anything. Like, none of this is a solution at all. And also, why does good things happen to bad people? I mean, I feel like it's because we as people have to hold those people accountable. God has no part in that. And if you just want to wait until they die and say, oh, well, you know, God's judging them right now, then you've essentially allowed a shithead to get away with his shithead actions and not hold them accountable for those said shithead actions. And instead, you've preferred to sit back and be like, God's going to get him one day. And then that's it. And you're not going to hold them accountable. Like, this is our fault if somebody is not held accountable for their actions. It's not God's fault or anything like that. But if the Christian God were to exist and were to be benevolent, then he should want to prevent bad people from getting away with their shithead actions. But God doesn't seem to do that. God seems to just let them get away with it. And then, you know, all they have to do is say, I believe in Jesus, please forgive me. And then boom, they're up in heaven. It's like, shucks. He was just fooling. He's just fooling all of us. He's okay. Let him in the door, Jesus. I don't see how there's any justice provided by Christianity.
The Bible also claims this. It says most men proclaim their own goodness. And when people say that they're good people or they like to assert their own goodness, as I have personally seen many times when I've asked people if they believe themselves to be good people, it proves the Bible.
No. Me saying I'm a good person. I'm just a good person over here sitting, playing Spider-Man 2 and everything like that. I'm not doing anything to hurt anybody else. Like, us doing some kind of self-reflection as to, you know, any kind of harm that we're doing does not prove the Bible. I mean, just because, the Bible says, oh, people proclaim that they're good. Okay. That's probably happened for a good bit of history. People saying, I'm a good person. Not everybody, obviously, but I feel like in the instances where that does happen, just because it does happen doesn't mean that the Bible is proven right. And also what it means to be good in Christianity is completely different than what it means to be a good and moral person. What in Christianity, what it means to be good is that you're following God's word and God's law and all that, doing everything in your life with God first. Like, that's what it means to be a quote unquote good Christian, which is not exactly a one-to-one match on what it means to be a good and moral person. person. You have to really sort of readjust yourself when you're talking about these two topics here, because you could be a totally shithead Christian, but be a good Christian. You can't be a shithead person and be a good and moral person.
We are bad people because God's righteous is infinitely higher than our righteous, and he demands eternal payment for our finite sin because that finite sin has eternal consequences.
See, I don't understand this particular aspect of Christianity. This just seems like bullshit to me, because finite actions require eternal punishment because these finite actions have eternal consequences. What does that mean exactly? Like, what kind of action can you do now has eternal consequences in the same way? Like, I can't think of a single one other than just not believing in a God, which is the primary sin that's characterized in the Bible, is not believing in God, not believing in Jesus. Like, that's it. That's the primary sin. Like, that's the main sin is that, believing in God, or not believing in God rather, is the sin. Apparently that requires eternal punishment because it has an eternal consequence. And I don't understand that. Could somebody please help me understand this?
Every finite sin that we do is a sin against an eternal God, and it demands an eternal payment.
This is just baseless assertion here. I have no idea how he's grounding this, that, a quote unquote sin against an eternal God requires eternal payment. You're just arbitrarily putting eternal in there just so that you could justify having this eternal God that you have to appease. You're just stuffing words in when you don't fucking need to.
And unless you believe this, what I'm about to say next will sound like utter foolishness to you. The only credible religion to have a payment system for sin that is not somehow working off our bad deeds is Christianity.
Again, that Christianity has the best solution for the bullshit that Christianity created in the first place. Well, so not Christianity, but Abrahamic religions. So Christianity is an Abrahamic religion that perfectly solves the issues that Abrahamic religions have created in the first place. They don't realize, he doesn't realize rather, that Judaism also provides a solution for it. Islam, it provides a solution for it too, because they're all Abrahamic religions. The Abrahamic religion solves the problems that were initially created by the Abrahamic religion. So therefore, his Abrahamic religion is the best religion.
Working off our bad deeds does not even work in a court of law, and it certainly will not work for the God of the Bible, who is a righteous judge, as Psalm 7:11 describes him. This is why there's eternal payment for, in actuality, our eternal sin, which is either hell or the eternal sacrifice of Jesus Christ.
Is his sacrifice really all that eternal, though? I mean, seriously, he died and he took 3 days to respawn. Like, I mean, I don't see that as like an eternal sacrifice. I mean, he died once, and apparently that is supposed to absolve all of this eternal sin. Like, that's an eternal payment. Again, I feel like this is just stuffing words into this equation when they don't need to be there. And it ends up making it incoherent. Like, I don't understand how this could be coherent to anybody. I mean, I know I used to be a Christian, but I didn't really think deeply into like the actual equation on this. I just simply don't understand how Jesus's death, this one death, is an eternal payment for anything. Like, there were several Jews that died prior to that Jew dying. And there were several supposed messiahs that also died before that one died. And if God has existed for eternity, what's a little bit of this, suffering and death compared to an eternity? Like, it's minuscule. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, the math on this just doesn't fucking work out. It's like you're saying X plus 2 equals Zumbas.
Have you heard about what Jesus did? He was fully God and fully man, lived a perfect life, and died on the cross as the perfect sacrifice for sins. God really showed his true love, that he is the embodiment of love and is not willing that any perish, but that all come to repentance. But if you harden your heart against this message and do not trust in him, there is no hope.
The rest of this is just preaching, and I don't feel like sitting through that, and I don't feel like making you guys sit through it, because basically he's just going over the whole Christian proselytizing message of God, of Jesus's saving death, and how it's a free gift and all this other stuff, so that you can go to heaven with all the other Christians that probably hate you. I am not convinced by this whatsoever because, like I've said, the math, it just doesn't make sense to me on this whole like eternal salvation kind of thing. Also, the entire concept of eternal life and heaven and a burning hell and all that actually comes from other mystery religions. They were first thought up there, and then Christianity adopted them into, you know, their own version of it. And so I'm not convinced by any of this supernatural shit. I don't understand how God suffering and dying one day, like less than a day, means that I somehow now have everlasting life. Like all of that seems very incoherent to me, and it seems really primitive in theology as far as, you know, where it comes from, where it stems from. It's very primitive thinking. This whole idea that one dude's death can give you everlasting life, like that just seems like a non sequitur. It seems incoherent to me, and I feel like it's always going to seem incoherent to me. I really don't consider this as my heart being hardened against Jesus. If we could actually prove this in some kind of way, that you know, if there was some evidence out there that could prove that Jesus's death provided this salvation or whatnot, then I would agree. Like I would say that, yeah, sure, Jesus's death did that. Now, whether or not I would believe in worship in those particular gods is a totally different story, but I would at least accept it as a fact of reality. As it stands, though, it's incoherent, and I don't understand why people would actually be convinced by this. I feel like if somebody heard this now that is otherwise reasonable, I can't imagine why they would be convinced by this poor argument of somebody dying and then being given, you know, eternal life. I could totally see the motive in that, oh, I know that I've done bad shit and I haven't been held accountable for that bad shit. How can I absolve this and make myself feel better? Oh, I'll become Christian and then I can be absolved of all my sins. And, you know, I can have that stress washed away from me. That is a motive to become a Christian. It's definitely not a motive to become an atheist, because I don't want my sins to be exposed to light or anything like that. I feel like the motive is greater to have those sins freely washed away because it's a free gift. Oh, look, free gift. No accountability. That's the gift I'm giving you. Don't have accountability for your actions because I died, is what Jesus says to you. Like I said, I'm not going to make you sit through the rest of this. I really appreciate you heathens joining me today. All in all, was not convinced by this guy's video. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you thought about his video. Do you think that he was convincing? Do you think that I'm missing something here in this whole Jesus equation? Let me know down below. While you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.